Chapter 1. The Tuesday Nightclub. Unsolved Mysteries. Raymond West blew out a cloud of smoke and repeated the words with a kind of deliberate, self-conscious pleasure. Unsolved mysteries! He looked around him with satisfaction. The room was an old one, with broad black beams across the ceiling, and it was furnished with good old furniture that belonged to it. Hence Raymond West's approving glance. By profession, he was a writer, and he liked the atmosphere to be flawless. His Aunt Jane's house always pleased him as the right setting for her personality. He looked across the hearth to where she sat erect in the big grandfather chair. Miss Marple wore a black brocade dress, very much pinched in round the waist. Mechlin lace was arranged in a cascade down the front of the bodice. She had on black lace mittens, and a black lace cap surmounted the piled-up masses of her snowy hair. She was knitting something white and soft and fleecy. Her faded blue eyes, benignant and kindly, surveyed her nephew and her nephew's guests with gentle pleasure. They rested first on Raymond himself, self-consciously debonair, then on Joyce Lempriere, the artist, with her close-cropped black head and queer hazel-green eyes, then on that well-groomed man of the world, Sir Henry Clithering. There were two other people in the room. Dr. Pender, the elderly clergyman of the parish, and Mr. Petherick, the solicitor, a dried-up little man with eyeglasses which he looked over and not through. Miss Marple gave a brief moment of attention to all these people and returned to her knitting with a gentle smile upon her lips. Mr. Petherick gave the dry little cough with which he usually prefaced his remarks. "What is that you say? Raymond unsolved mysteries, ha, and what about them?" "Nothing about them," said Joyce Lempriere. "Raymond just likes the sound of the words and of himself saying them." Raymond West threw her a glance of reproach, at which she threw back her head and laughed. "He is a humbug, isn't he, Miss Marple?" she demanded. "You know that, I am sure." Miss Marple smiled gently at her, but made no reply. "Life itself is an unsolved mystery," said the clergyman gravely. Raymond sat up in his chair and flung away his cigarette with an impulsive gesture. "That's not what I mean. I was not talking philosophy," he said. "I was thinking of actual bare prosaic facts, things that have happened and that no one has ever explained. I know just the sort of thing you mean." "Dear," said Miss Marple. "For instance, Mrs. Carruthers had a very strange experience yesterday morning. She bought 2 gills of picked shrimps at Elliott's. She called at 2 other shops, and when she got home, she found she had not got the shrimps with her. She went back to the 2 shops she had visited, but these shrimps had completely disappeared." "Now that seems to me very remarkable." "A very fishy story," said Sir Henry Clithering gravely. "There are, of course, all kinds of possible explanations," said Miss Marple, her cheeks growing slightly pinker with excitement. "For instance, somebody else, my dear aunt," said Raymond West with some amusement. "I didn't mean that sort of village incident. I was thinking of murders and disappearances, the kind of thing that Sir Henry could tell us about by the hour, if he liked." "But I never talk shop," said Sir Henry modestly. "No, I never talk shop." Sir Henry Clithering had been until lately Commissioner of Scotland Yard. "I suppose there are a lot of murders, and things that never are solved by the police," said Joyce Lempriere. "That is an admitted fact, I believe," said Mr. Petherick. "I wonder," said Raymond West, What class of brain really succeeds best in unraveling a mystery? One always feels that the average police detective must be hampered by lack of imagination. That is the layman's point of view, said Sir Henry dryly. You really want a committee, said Joyce, smiling. For psychology and imagination, go to the writer. She made an ironical bow to Raymond, but he remained serious. The art of writing gives one an insight into human nature, he said gravely. One sees, perhaps, motives that the ordinary person would pass by. I know, dear, said Miss Marple, that your books are very clever. But do you think that people are really so unpleasant as you make them out to be? My dear aunt, said Raymond gently, keep your beliefs. Heaven forbid that I should in any way shatter them. I mean, said Miss Marple, puckering her brow a little as she counted the stitches in her knitting, that so many people seem to me and to be either bad or good, but simply, you know, very silly. Mr. Petherick gave his dry little cough again. Don't you think, Raymond, he said, that you attach too much weight to imagination? Imagination is a very dangerous thing, as we lawyers know only too well. To be able to sift evidence impartially, to take the facts and look at them as facts, that seems to me the only logical method of arriving at the truth. I may add that in my experience, it is the only one that succeeds. Bah! Cried Joyce, flinging back her black head indignantly. I bet I could beat you all at this game. I am not only a woman, and say what you like. Women have an intuition that is denied to men. I am an artist as well. I see things that you don't, and then, too, as an artist I have knocked about among all sorts and conditions of people. I know life as darling Miss Marple here cannot possibly know it. I don't know about that, dear, said Miss Marple. Very painful and distressing things happen in villages sometimes. May I speak Gossold, said Dr. Kurpender, smiling. It is the fashion nowadays to decry the clergy, I know, but we hear things. We know a side of human character which is a sealed book to the outside world. Well, said Joyce, it seems to me we are a pretty representative gathering. How would it be if we formed a club? What is today? Tuesday. We will call it the Tuesday Night Club. It is to meet every week, and each member in turn has to propound a problem, some mystery of which they have personal knowledge, and to which of course, they know the answer. Let me see. How many are we? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We ought really to be 6. You have forgotten me, dear, said Miss Marple, smiling brightly. Joyce was slightly taken aback, but she concealed the fact quickly. That would be lovely, Miss Marple, she said. I didn't think you would care to play. I think it would be very interesting, said Miss Marple, especially with so many clever gentlemen present. I am afraid I am not clever myself, but living all these years in St. Mary Mead does give one an insight into human nature. I am sure your cooperation will be very valuable, said Sir Henry, courteously. Who is going to start? Said Joyce. I think there is no doubt as to that, said Dr. Pender. When we have the great good fortune to have such a distinguished man as Sir Henry staying with us. He left his sentence unfinished, making a courtly bow in the direction of Sir Henry. The latter was silent for a minute or two. At last he sighed and recrossed his legs and began. It is a little difficult for me to select just the kind of thing you want, but I think, as it happens, I know of an instance which fits these conditions very aptly. You may have seen some mention of the case in the papers of a year ago. It was laid aside at the time as an unsolved mystery, but, as it happens, the solution came into my hands not very many days ago. The facts are very simple. 3 people sat down to a supper consisting, amongst other things, of tinned lobster. Later in the night, all 3 were taken ill, and a doctor was hastily summoned. 2 of the people recovered. The third one died. "Ah," said Raymond approvingly. "As I say, the facts as such were very simple. Death was considered to be due to ptomaine poisoning. A certificate was given to that effect, and the victim was duly buried. But things did not rest at that." Miss Marple nodded her head. "There was talk, I suppose," she said. "There usually is. And now I must describe the actors in this little drama. I will call the husband and wife Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and the wife's companion Miss Clark. Mr. Jones was a traveler for a firm of manufacturing chemists. He was a good-looking man, in a kind of coarse, florid way. Aged about 50, his wife was a rather commonplace woman of about 45. The companion, Miss Clark, was a woman of 60, a stout, cheery woman with a beaming, rubicund face. None of them, you might say, very interesting. Now, the beginning of the troubles arose in a very curious way. Mr. Jones had been staying the previous night at a small commercial hotel in Birmingham. It happened that the blotting paper in the blotting book had been put in fresh that day, and the chambermaid, having apparently nothing better to do, amused herself by studying the blotter in the mirror just after Mr. Jones had been writing a letter there. A few days later, there was a report in the papers of the death of Mrs. Jones as the result of eating tinned lobster, and the chambermaid then imparted to her fellow servants the words that she had deciphered on the blotting pad. They were as follows, entirely dependent on my wife. When she is dead, I will hundreds and thousands. You may remember that there had recently been a case of a wife being poisoned by her husband. It needed very little to fire the imagination of these maids. Mr. Jones had planned to do away with his wife and inherit hundreds of thousands of pounds. As it happened, one of the maids had relations living in the small market town where the Joneses resided. She wrote to them, and they, in return, wrote to her. Mr. Jones, it seemed, had been very attentive to the local doctor's daughter, a good-looking young woman of 33. Scandal began to hum. The Home Secretary was petitioned. Numerous anonymous letters poured into Scotland Yard, all accusing Mr. Jones of having murdered his wife. Now I may say that not for one moment did we think there was anything in it except idle village talk and gossip. Nevertheless, to quiet public opinion, an exhumation order was granted. It was one of these cases of popular superstition, based on nothing solid whatever, which proved to be so surprisingly justified. As a result of the autopsy, sufficient arsenic was found to make it quite clear that the deceased lady had died of arsenical poisoning. It was for Scotland Yard, working with the local authorities, to prove how that arsenic had been administered, and by whom. "Ah," said Joyce, "I like this. This is the real stuff." Suspicion naturally fell on the husband. He benefited by his wife's death. not to the extent of the hundreds of thousands romantically imagined by the hotel chambermaid, but to the very solid amount of 8,000 thalers. He had no money of his own apart from what he earned, and he was a man of somewhat extravagant habits with a partiality for the society of women. We investigated as delicately as possible the rumor of his attachment to the doctor's daughter, but while it seemed clear that there had been a strong friendship between them at one time, there had been a most abrupt break 2 months previously, and they did not appear to have seen each other since. The doctor himself, an elderly man of a straightforward and unsuspicious type, was dumbfounded at the result of the autopsy. He had been called in about midnight to find all three people suffering. He had realized immediately the serious condition of Mrs. Jones and had sent back to his dispensary for some opium pills to allay the pain. In spite of all his efforts, however, she succumbed. But not for a moment did he suspect that anything was amiss. He was convinced that her death was due to a form of botulism. Supper that night had consisted of tinned lobster and salad, trifle and bread and cheese. Unfortunately, none of the lobster remained. It had all been eaten and the tin thrown away. He had interrogated the young maid, Gladys Lynch. She was terribly upset, very tearful and agitated, and he found it hard to get her to keep to the point. But she declared again and again that the tin had not been distended in any way, and that the lobster had appeared to her in a perfectly good condition. Such were the facts we had to go upon. If Jones had feloniously administered arsenic to his wife, it seemed clear that it could not have been done in any of the things eaten at supper, as all three persons had partaken of the meal. Also, another point, Jones himself had returned from Birmingham just as supper was being brought in to table, so that he would have had no opportunity of doctoring any of the food beforehand. "What about the companion?" asked Joyce, the stout woman with the good-humored face. Sir Henry nodded. "We did not neglect Miss Clark, I can assure you, but it seemed doubtful what motive she could have had for the crime. Mrs. Jones left her no legacy of any kind, and the net result of her employer's death was that she had to seek for another situation." "That seems to leave her out of it," said Joyce thoughtfully. "Now, one of my inspectors soon discovered a significant fact," went on Sir Henry. "After supper on that evening, Mr. Jones had gone down to the kitchen and had demanded a bowl of cornflour for his wife, who had complained of not feeling well. He had waited in the kitchen until Gladys Lynch prepared it, and then carried it up to his wife's room himself. That, I admit, seemed to clinch the case." The lawyer nodded. "Motive," he said, ticking the points off on his fingers. "Opportunity as a traveler for a firm of druggists. Easy access to the poison, and a man of weak moral fiber," said the clergyman. Raymond West was staring at Sir Henry. "There is a catch in this somewhere," he said. "Why did you not arrest him?" Sir Henry smiled rather wryly. "That is the unfortunate part of the case. So far all had gone swimmingly, but now we come to the snags. Jones was not arrested because on interrogating Miss Clark, she told us that the whole of the bowl of cornflour was drunk not by Mrs. Jones, but by her. Yes, it seems that she went to Mrs. Jones's room, as was her custom. Mrs. Jones was sitting up in bed, and the bowl of cornflour was beside her. I'm not feeling a bit well. Millie, she said, serves me right, I suppose. for touching a lobster at night. I asked Albert to get me a bowl of cornflour, but now that I have got it, I don't seem to fancy it. A pity, commented Miss Clark. It is nicely made, too. No lumps. Gladys is really quite a nice cook. Very few girls nowadays seem to be able to make a bowl of cornflour nicely. I declare I quite fancy it myself. I am that hungry. I should think you were with your foolish ways, said Mrs. Jones. I must explain, broke off Sir Henry, that Miss Clark, alarmed at her increasing stoutness, was doing a course of what is popularly known as banting. It is not good for you. Millie, it really isn't, urged Mrs. Jones. If the Lord made you stout, he meant you to be stout. You drink up that bowl of cornflour, it will do you all the good in the world. And straightway Miss Clark set to and did, in actual fact, finish the bowl. So, you see, that knocked our case against the husband to pieces. Asked for an explanation of the words on the blotting book, Jones gave one readily enough. The letter, he explained, was an answer to one written from his brother in Australia, who had applied to him for money. He had written, pointing out that he was entirely dependent on his wife. When his wife was dead, he would have control of money and would assist his brother if possible. He regretted his inability to help, but pointed out that there were hundreds and thousands of people in the world in the same unfortunate plight. And so the case fell to pieces, said Dr. Pender. And so the case fell to pieces, said Sir Henry gravely. We could not take the risk of arresting Jones with nothing to go upon. There was a silence, and then Joyce said, And that is all, is it? That is the case as it has stood for the last year. The true solution is now in the hands of Scotland Yard, and in 2 or 3 days' time, you will probably read of it in the newspapers. The true solution, said Joyce thoughtfully. I wonder. Let's all think for 5 minutes, and then speak. Raymond West nodded and noted the time on his watch. When the 5 minutes were up, he looked over at Dr. Pender. Will you speak first? He said. The old man shook his head. I confess, he said, that I am utterly baffled. I can but think that the husband, in some way, must be the guilty party. But how he did it, I cannot imagine. I can only suggest that he must have given her the poison in some way that has not yet been discovered. Although how, in that case, it should have come to light after all this time, I cannot imagine. Joyce. The companion, said Joyce decidedly. The companion every time. How do we know what motive she may have had? Just because she was old and stout and ugly, it doesn't follow that she wasn't in love with Jones herself. She may have hated the wife for some other reason. Think of being a companion, always having to be pleasant and agree and stifle yourself and bottle yourself up. One day she couldn't bear it any longer, and then she killed her. She probably put the arsenic in the bowl of cornflour, and all that story about eating it herself is a lie. Mr. Petherick. The lawyer joined the tips of his fingers together professionally. I should hardly like to say. On the facts, I should hardly like to say. But you have got to, Mr. Petherick, said Joyce. You can't reserve judgment and say without prejudice and be legal. You have got to play the game. On the facts, said Mr. Petherick. There seems nothing to be said. It is my private opinion, having seen, alas, too many cases of this kind, that the husband was guilty. The only explanation that will cover the facts seems to be that Miss Clark, for some reason or other, deliberately sheltered him. There may have been some financial arrangement made between them. He might realize that he would be suspected, and she, seeing only a future of poverty before her, may have agreed to tell the story of drinking the cornflower in return for a substantial sum to be paid to her privately. If that was the case, it was of course most irregular. Most irregular indeed. I disagree with you all, said Raymond. You have forgotten the one important factor in the case. The doctor's daughter. I will give you my reading of the case. The tinned lobster was bad. It accounted for the poisoning symptoms. The doctor was sent for. He finds Mrs. Jones, who has eaten more lobster than the others, in great pain, and he sends, as you told us, for some opium pills. He does not go himself. He sends. Who will give the messenger the opium pills? Clearly his daughter. Very likely she dispenses his medicines for him. She is in love with Jones, and at this moment all the worst instincts in her nature rise, and she realizes that the means to procure his freedom are in her hands. The pills she sends contain pure white arsenic. That is my solution. And now, Sir Henry, tell us, said Joyce eagerly. One moment, said Sir Henry. Miss Marple has not yet spoken. Miss Marple was shaking her head sadly. Dear, dear, she said, I have dropped another stitch. I have been so interested in the story. A sad case, a very sad case. It reminds me of old Mr. Hargraves, who lived up at the Mount. His wife never had the least suspicion until he died, leaving all his money to a woman he had been living with, and by whom he had 5 children. She had at one time been their housemaid. Such a nice girl. Mrs. Hargraves always said thoroughly to be relied upon to turn the mattresses every day, except Fridays, of course. And there was old Hargraves keeping this woman in a house in the neighboring town, and continuing to be a churchwarden and to hand round the plate every Sunday. My dear Aunt Jane, said Raymond with some impatience, what has dead and gone Hargraves got to do with the case? This story made me think of him at once, said Miss Marple. The facts are so very alike, aren't they? I suppose the poor girl has confessed now, and that is how you know, Sir Henry. What girl? Said Raymond. My dear aunt, what are you talking about? That poor girl, Gladys Lynch. Of course, the one who was so terribly agitated when the doctor spoke to her, and well she might be. Poor thing. I hope that wicked Jones is hanged. I am sure. Making that poor girl a murderess. I suppose they will hang her too. Poor thing. I think, Miss Marple, that you are under a slight misapprehension, began Mr. Petherick. But Miss Marple shook her head obstinately and looked across at Sir Henry. I am right, am I not? It seems so clear to me. The hundreds and thousands and the trifle, I mean. One cannot miss it. What about the trifle and the hundreds and thousands, cried Raymond. His aunt turned to him. Cooks nearly always put hundreds and thousands on trifle, dear, she said. Those little pink and white sugar things. Of course, when I heard that they had trifle for supper and that the husband had been writing to someone about hundreds and thousands, I naturally connected the two things together. That is where the arsenic was, in the hundreds and thousands. He left it with the girl and told her to put it on the trifle. But that is impossible, said Joyce quickly. They all ate the trifle. Oh, no, said Miss Marple. The companion was banting. You remember. You never eat anything like trifle if you are banting, and I expect Jones just scraped the hundreds and thousands off his share and left them at the side of his plate. It was a clever idea, but a very wicked one. The eyes of the others were all fixed upon Sir Henry. It is a very curious thing, he said slowly, but Miss Marple happens to have hit upon the truth. Jones had got Gladys Lynch into trouble, as the saying goes. She was nearly desperate. He wanted his wife out of the way and promised to marry Gladys when his wife was dead. He doctored the hundreds and thousands and gave them to her with instructions how to use them. Gladys Lynch died a week ago. Her child died at birth, and Jones had deserted her for another woman. When she was dying, she confessed the truth. There was a few moments' silence, and then Raymond said, "Well, Aunt Jane, this is one up to you. I can't think how on earth you managed to hit upon the truth. I should never have thought of the little maid in the kitchen being connected with the case." "No, dear," said Miss Marple, "but you don't know as much of life as I do. A man of that Jones's type, coarse and jovial. As soon as I heard there was a pretty young girl in the house, I felt sure that he would not have left her alone. It is all very distressing and painful, and not a very nice thing to talk about. I can't tell you the shock it was to Mrs. Hargraves, and a 9 days' wonder in the village. Chapter 2. The Idle House of Astarte. And now, Dr. Pender, what are you going to tell us? The old clergyman smiled gently. My life has been passed in quiet places, he said. Very few eventful happenings have come my way. Yet once, when I was a young man, I had one very strange and tragic experience. Ah, said Joyce Lempriere encouragingly. I have never forgotten it, continued the clergyman. It made a profound impression on me at the time, and to this day, by a slight effort of memory, I can feel again the awe and horror of that terrible moment when I saw a man stricken to death by apparently no mortal agency. You make me feel quite creepy. Pender, complained Sir Henry. It made me feel creepy, as you call it, replied the other. Since then, I have never laughed at the people who use the word atmosphere. There is such a thing. There are certain places imbued and saturated with good or evil influences, which can make their power felt. That house, the Larches, is a very unhappy one, remarked Miss Marple. Old Mr. Smithers lost all his money and had to leave it. Then the Carslakes took it, and Johnny Carslake fell downstairs and broke his leg, and Mrs. Carslake had to go away to the south of France for her health. And now the Burdens have got it, and I hear that poor Mr. Burden has got to have an operation almost immediately. There is, I think, rather too much superstition about such matters. Said Mr. Petherick, a lot of damage is done to property by foolish reports heedlessly circulated. I have known one or two ghosts that have had a very robust personality, remarked Sir Henry with a chuckle. I think, said Raymond, we should allow Dr. Pender to go on with his story. Joyce got up and switched off the 2 lamps, leaving the room lit only by the flickering firelight. Atmosphere, she said. Now we can get along. Dr. Pender smiled at her, and leaning back in his chair and taking off his pince-nez, he began his story in a gentle, reminiscent voice. I don't know whether any of you know Dartmoor at all. The place I am telling you about is situated on the borders of Dartmoor. It was a very charming property, though it had been on the market without finding a purchaser for several years. The situation was perhaps a little bleak in winter, but the views were magnificent, and there were certain curious and original features about the property itself. It was bought by a man called Hayden Sir Richard Hayden. I had known him in his college days, and though I had lost sight of him for some years, the old ties of friendship still held, and I accepted with pleasure his invitation to go down to Silent Grove, as his new purchase was called. The house party was not a very large one. There was Richard Hayden himself, and his cousin, Elliot Hayden. There was a Lady Mannering, with a pale, rather inconspicuous daughter called Violet. There was a Captain Rogers and his wife, hard-riding, weather-beaten people, who lived only for horses and hunting. There was also a young Dr. Simons, and there was Miss Diana Ashley. I knew something about the last named. Her picture was very often in the society papers, and she was one of the notorious beauties of the season. Her appearance was indeed very striking. She was dark and tall, with a beautiful skin of an even tint of pale cream, and her half-closed dark eyes, set slantways in her head, gave her a curiously piquant oriental appearance. She had, too, a wonderful speaking voice, deep-toned and bell-like. I saw at once that my friend Richard Hayden was very much attracted by her, and I guessed that the whole party was merely arranged as a setting for her. Of her own feelings, I was not so sure. She was capricious in her favors, one day talking to Richard and excluding everyone else from her notice, and another day she would favor his cousin, Elliot, and appear hardly to notice that such a person as Richard existed. And then again, she would bestow the most bewitching smiles upon the quiet and retiring Dr. Simons. On the morning after my arrival, our host showed us all over the place. The house itself was unremarkable. A good solid house, built of Devonshire granite, built to withstand time and exposure. It was unromantic, but very comfortable. From the windows of it, one looked out over the panorama of the moor, vast rolling hills crowned with weather-beaten tors. On the slopes of the tor nearest to us were various hut circles, relics of the bygone days of the late Stone Age. On another hill was a barrow which had recently been excavated, and in which certain bronze implements had been found. Hayden was by way of being interested in antiquarian matters, and he talked to us with a great deal of energy and enthusiasm. This particular spot, he explained, was particularly rich in relics of the past. Neolithic hut dwellers, Druids, Romans, and even traces of the early Phoenicians were to be found. But this place is the most interesting of all, he said. You know its name, Silent Grove. Well, it is easy enough to see what it takes its name from. He pointed with his hand. That particular part of the country was bare enough rocks, heather and bracken, but about 100 yards from the house there was a densely planted grove of trees. That is a relic of very early days, said Hayden. The trees have died and been replanted, but on the whole, it has been kept very much as it used to be, perhaps in the time of the Phoenician settlers. Come and look at it. We all followed him. As we entered the grove of trees, a curious oppression came over me. I think it was the silence. No birds seemed to nest in these trees. There was a feeling about it of desolation and horror. I saw Hayden looking at me with a curious smile. Any feeling about this place? Pender, he asked me. Antagonism now, or uneasiness? I don't like it. I said quietly, you are within your rights. This was a stronghold of one of the ancient enemies of your faith. This is the grove of Astarte. Astarte, Astarte, or Ishtar, or Ashtoreth, or whatever you choose to call her. I prefer the Phoenician name of Astarte. There is, I believe, one known grove of Astarte in this country in the north on the wall. I have no evidence, but I like to believe that we have a true and authentic grove of Astarte here. Here, within this dense circle of trees, sacred rites were performed. Sacred rites, murmured Diana Ashley. Her eyes had a dreamy, faraway look. What were they? I wonder. Not very reputable by all accounts, said Captain Rogers with a loud, unmeaning laugh. Rather hot stuff, I imagine. Hayden paid no attention to him. GM. In the center of the grove, there should be a temple, he said. I can't run to temples, but I have indulged in a little fancy of my own. We had at that moment stepped out into a little clearing in the center of the trees. In the middle of it was something not unlike a summer house made of stone. Diana. Ashley looked inquiringly at Hayden. I call it the idol house. He said, it is the idol house of Astarte. He led the way up to it. Inside, on a rude ebony pillar, there reposed a curious little image representing a woman with crescent horns seated on a lion. Astarte of the Phoenicians, said Hayden, the goddess of the moon. The goddess of the moon, cried Diana. Oh, do let us have a wild orgy tonight. Fancy dress. And we will come out here in the moonlight and celebrate the rites of Astarte. I made a sudden movement, and Elliot Hayden, Richard's cousin, turned quickly to me. You don't like all this, do you? Padre, he said. No, I said gravely. I don't. He looked at me curiously. But it is only tomfoolery. Dick can't know that this really is a sacred grove. It is just a fancy of his. He likes to play with the idea. And anyway, if it were... Well, he laughed uncomfortably. You don't believe in that sort of thing. Do you... A parson? I am not sure that as a parson I ought not to believe in it. But that sort of thing is all finished and done with. I am not so sure. I said musingly, I only know this. I am not, as a rule, a sensitive man to atmosphere, but ever since I entered this grove of trees, I have felt a curious impression and sense of evil and menace all round me. He glanced uneasily over his shoulder. Yes, he said, it is queer. Somehow. I know what you mean, but I suppose it is only our imagination makes us feel like that. What do you say? Simons. The doctor was silent a minute or two before he replied. Then he said quietly, I don't like it. I can't tell you why. But somehow or other, I don't like it. At that moment, Violet Mannering came across to me. I hate this place, she cried. I hate it. Do let's get out of it. We moved away, and the others followed us. Only Diana Ashley lingered. I turned my head over my shoulder and saw her standing in front of the idol house, gazing earnestly at the image within it. The day was an unusually hot and beautiful one, and Diana Ashley's suggestion of a fancy dress party that evening was received with general favor. The usual laughing and whispering and frenzied secret sewing took place, And when we all made our appearance for dinner, there were the usual outcries of merriment. Rogers and his wife were Neolithic hut dwellers, explaining the sudden lack of hearth rugs. Richard Haydn called himself a Phoenician sailor, and his cousin was a brigand chief. Dr. Simons was a chef. Lady Mannering was a hospital nurse, and her daughter was a Circassian slave. I myself was arrayed somewhat too warmly as a monk. Diana Ashley came down last and was somewhat of a disappointment to all of us, being wrapped in a shapeless black domino. "The unknown," she declared airily. "That is what I am. Now, for goodness sake, let's go in to dinner." After dinner, we went outside. It was a lovely night, warm and soft, and the moon was rising. We wandered about and chatted, and the time passed quickly enough. It must have been an hour later when we realized that Diana Ashley was not with us. "Surely she has not gone to bed," said Richard Haydn. Violet Mannering shook her head. "Oh, no," she said. "I saw her going off in that direction about a quarter of an hour ago." She pointed as she spoke towards the grove of trees that showed black and shadowy in the moonlight. "I wonder what she is up to," said Richard Haydn. "Some devilment, I swear. Let's go and see." We all trooped off together, somewhat curious as to what Miss Ashley had been up to. Yet I, for one, felt a curious reluctance to enter that dark, foreboding belt of trees. Something stronger than myself seemed to be holding me back and urging me not to enter. I felt more definitely convinced than ever of the essential evilness of the spot. I think that some of the others experienced the same sensations that I did, though they would have been loath to admit it. The trees were so closely planted that the moonlight could not penetrate. There were a dozen soft sounds all round us, whisperings and sighings. The feeling was eerie in the extreme, and by common consent, we all kept close together. Suddenly we came out into the open clearing in the middle of the grove and stood rooted to the spot in amazement. For there, on the threshold of the idol house, stood a shimmering figure wrapped tightly round in diaphanous gauze, and with two crescent horns rising from the dark masses of her hair. "My God," said Richard Haydn, and the sweat sprang out on his brow. But Violet Mannering was sharper. "Why, it's Diana," she exclaimed. "What has she done to herself? Oh, she looks quite different somehow." The figure in the doorway raised her hands. She took a step forward and chanted in a high, sweet voice. "I am the priestess of Astarte," she crooned. "Beware how you approach me, for I hold death in my hand." "Don't do it, dear," protested Lady Mannering. "You give us the creeps. You really do." Haydn sprang forward towards her. "My God." "Diana," he cried, "you are wonderful." My eyes were accustomed to the moonlight now, and I could see more plainly. She did, indeed, as Violet had said, look quite different. Her face was more definitely oriental, and her eyes more of slits with something cruel in their gleam. And the strange smile on her lips was one that I had never seen there before. "Beware," she cried warningly. "Do not approach the goddess. If anyone lays a hand on me, it is death. You are wonderful." "Diana," cried Haydn, "but do stop it. Somehow or other I don't like it." He was moving towards her across the grass, and she flung out a hand towards him. "Stop," she cried. "One step nearer, and I will smite you with the magic of Astarte." Richard Haydn laughed and quickened his pace. when all at once a curious thing happened. He hesitated for a moment, then seemed to stumble and fall headlong. He did not get up again, but lay where he had fallen prone on the ground. Suddenly, Diana began to laugh hysterically. It was a strange, horrible sound breaking the silence of the glade. With an oath, Elliot sprang forward. "I can't stand this," he cried. "Get up, Dick! Get up, man!" But still Richard Hayden lay where he had fallen. Elliot Hayden reached his side, knelt by him, and turned him gently over. He bent over him, peering in his face. Then he rose sharply to his feet and stood, swaying a little. "Doctor," he said, "Doctor, for God's sake, come. I think he is dead." Simons ran forward, and Elliot rejoined us, walking very slowly. He was looking down at his hands in a way I didn't understand. At that moment, there was a wild scream from Diana. "I have killed him," she cried. "Oh my God, I didn't mean to. But I have killed him." And she fainted dead away, falling in a crumpled heap upon the grass. There was a cry from Mrs. Rogers. "Oh, do let us get away from this dreadful place," she wailed. "Anything might happen to us here. Oh, it's awful." Elliot got hold of me by the shoulder. "It can't be, man," he murmured. "I tell you, it can't be. A man cannot be killed like that. It's against nature." I tried to soothe him. "There is some explanation." I said, "Your cousin must have had some unsuspected weakness of the heart. The shock and excitement." He interrupted me. "You don't understand." He said, he held up his hands for me to see, and I noticed a red stain on them. "Dick didn't die of shock. He was stabbed to the heart. And there is no weapon." I stared at him incredulously. At that moment, Simons rose from his examination of the body and came towards us. He was pale and shaking all over. "Are we all mad?" he said. "What is this place that things like this can happen in it?" "Then it is true," I said. He nodded. "The wound is such as would be made by a long, thin dagger. But there is no dagger there." We all looked at each other. "But it must be there," cried Elliot Hayden. "It must have dropped out. It must be on the ground somewhere. Let us look." We peered about vainly on the ground. Violet Mannering said suddenly, "Diana had something in her hand, a kind of dagger. I saw it. I saw it glitter when she threatened him." Elliot Hayden shook his head. "He never even got within 3 yards of her." He objected. Lady Mannering was bending over the prostrate girl on the ground. "There is nothing in her hand now," she announced, "and I can't see anything on the ground. Are you sure you saw it?" Violet: "I didn't." Dr. Simons came over to the girl. "We must get her to the house." He said, "Rogers, will you help?" Between us, we carried the unconscious girl back to the house. Then we returned and fetched the body of Sir Richard. Dr. Pender broke off apologetically and looked round. "One would know better nowadays," he said, "owing to the prevalence of detective fiction. Every street boy knows that a body must be left where it is found. But in these days, we had not the same knowledge, and accordingly we carried the body of Richard Hayden back to his bedroom in the square granite house, and the butler was dispatched on a bicycle in search of the police, a ride of some 12 miles. It was then that Elliot Hayden drew me aside. "Look here," he said. "I am going back to the grove. That weapon has got to be found." "If there was a weapon," I said doubtfully. He seized my arm and shook it fiercely. "You have got that superstitious stuff into your head. You think his death was supernatural. Well, I am going back to the grove to find out. I was curiously averse to his doing so. I did my utmost to dissuade him, but without result. The mere idea of that thick circle of trees was abhorrent to me, and I felt a strong premonition of further disaster. But Elliot was entirely pig-headed. He was, I think, scared himself, but would not admit it. He went off fully armed with determination to get to the bottom of the mystery. It was a very dreadful night. None of us could sleep, or attempt to do so. The police, when they arrived, were frankly incredulous of the whole thing. They evinced a strong desire to cross-examine Miss Ashley, but there they had to reckon with Dr. Simons, who opposed the idea vehemently. Miss Ashley had come out of her faint or trance, and he had given her a long sleeping draught. She was on no account to be disturbed until the following day. It was not until about 7 o'clock in the morning that anyone thought about Elliot Hayden, and then Simons suddenly asked where he was. I explained what Elliot had done, and Simon's grave face grew a shade graver. I wish he hadn't. It is foolhardy, he said. You don't think any harm can have happened to him? I hope not. I think, Padre, that you and I had better go and see. I knew he was right, but it took all the courage in my command to nerve myself for the task. We set out together and entered once more that ill-fated grove of trees. We called him twice and got no reply. In a minute or two, we came into the clearing, which looked pale and ghostly in the early morning light. Simons clutched my arm, and I uttered a muttered exclamation. Last night, when we had seen it in the moonlight, there had been the body of a man lying face downwards on the grass. Now, in the early morning light, the same sight met our eyes. Elliot Hayden was lying on the exact spot where his cousin had been. My God, said Simons, it has got him too. We ran together over the grass. Elliot Hayden was unconscious, but breathing feebly, and this time there was no doubt of what had caused the tragedy. A long, thin bronze weapon remained in the wound. Got him through the shoulder, not through the heart. That is lucky, commented the doctor. On my soul, I don't know what to think. At any rate, he is not dead, and he will be able to tell us what happened. But that was just what Elliot Hayden was not able to do. His description was vague in the extreme. He had hunted about vainly for the dagger, and at last, giving up the search, had taken up a stand near the idol house. It was then that he became increasingly certain that someone was watching him from the belt of trees. He fought against this impression, but was not able to shake it off. He described a cold, strange wind that began to blow. It seemed to come not from the trees, but from the interior of the idol house. He turned round. Peering inside it, he saw the small figure of the goddess, and he felt he was under an optical delusion. The figure seemed to grow larger and larger. Then he suddenly received something that felt like a blow between his temples, which sent him reeling back. And as he fell, he was conscious of a sharp burning pain in his left shoulder. The dagger was identified this time as being the identical one which had been dug up in the barrow on the hill, and which had been bought by Richard Hayden, where he had kept it, in the house, or in the idol house in the grove. None seemed to know. The police were of the opinion, and always will be, that he was deliberately stabbed by Miss Ashley. But in view of our combined evidence that she was never within 3 yards of him, they could not hope to support the charge against her. So the thing has been and remains a mystery. There was a silence. There doesn't seem anything to say, said Joyce Lempriere at length. It is all so horrible and uncanny. Have you no explanation for yourself? Dr. Pender. The old man nodded. Yes, he said. I have an explanation. A kind of explanation. That is, rather a curious one, but to my mind it still leaves certain factors unaccounted for. I have been to seances, said Joyce, and you may say what you like. Very queer things can happen. I suppose one can explain it by some kind of hypnotism. The girl really turned herself into a priestess of Astarte, and I suppose somehow or other she must have stabbed him. Perhaps she threw the dagger that Miss Mannering saw in her hand, or it might have been a javelin, suggested Raymond West. After all, moonlight is not very strong. She might have had a kind of spear in her hand and stabbed him at a distance. And then I suppose mass hypnotism comes into account. I mean, you were all prepared to see him stricken down by supernatural means, and so you saw it like that. I have seen many wonderful things done with weapons and knives at music halls, said Sir Henry. I suppose it is possible that a shank could have been concealed in the belt of trees, and that he might from there have thrown a knife or a dagger with sufficient accuracy, agreeing, of course, that he was a professional. I admit that that seems rather far-fetched, but it seems the only really feasible theory. You remember that the other man was distinctly under the impression that there was someone in the grove of trees watching him. As to Miss Mannering, saying that Miss Ashley had a dagger in her hand and the others saying she hadn't, that doesn't surprise me. If you had had my experience, you would know that 5 persons' account of the same thing will differ so widely as to be almost incredible. Mr. Petherick coughed. But in all these theories, we seem to be overlooking one essential fact. He remarked, what became of the weapon Miss Ashley could hardly get rid of a javelin standing as she was in the middle of an open space? And if a hidden murderer had thrown a dagger, then the dagger would still have been in the wound when the man was turned over. We must, I think, discard all far-fetched theories and confine ourselves to sober fact. And where does sober fact lead us? Well, one thing seems quite clear. No one was near the man when he was stricken down. So the only person who could have stabbed him was he himself. Suicide. In fact, but why on earth should he wish to commit suicide? Asked Raymond West incredulously. The lawyer coughed again. Ah, that is a question of theory once more, he said. At the moment, I am not concerned with theories. It seems to me, excluding the supernatural, in which I do not for one moment believe, that that was the only way things could have happened. He stabbed himself, and as he fell, his arms flew out, wrenching the dagger from the wound and flinging it far into the zone of the trees. That is, I think, although somewhat unlikely, a possible happening. I don't like to say. I am sure, said Miss Marple. It all perplexes me very much indeed, but curious things do happen. At Lady Sharpley's garden party last year, the man who was arranging the clock golf tripped over one of the numbers, quite unconscious he was, and didn't come round for about 5 minutes. Yes, dear aunt, said Raymond gently. But he wasn't stabbed, was he? Of course not. Dear, said Miss Marple, that is what I'm telling you. Of course, there is only one way that poor Sir Richard could have been stabbed. But I do wish I knew what caused him to stumble in the first place. Of course, it might have been a tree root. He would be looking at the girl, of course. And when it is moonlight, one does trip over things. You say that there is only one way that Sir Richard could have been stabbed. Miss Marple, said the clergyman, looking at her curiously. It is very sad, and I don't like to think of it. He was a right-handed man. Was he not, I mean, to stab himself in the left shoulder he must have been. I was always so sorry for poor Jack Baines in the war. He shot himself in the foot, you remember, after very severe fighting at Arras. He told me about it when I went to see him in hospital, and very ashamed of it he was. I don't expect this poor man, Elliot Hayden, profited much by his wicked crime. Elliot Hayden, cried Raymond. You think he did it. I don't see how anyone else could have done it, said Miss Marple, opening her eyes in gentle surprise. I mean if, as Mr. Petherick so wisely says, one looks at the facts and disregards all that atmosphere of heathen goddesses, which I don't think is very nice. He went up to him first and turned him over. And of course, to do that, he would have to have had his back to them all. And being dressed as a brigand chief, he would be sure to have a weapon of some kind in his belt. I remember dancing with a man dressed as a brigand chief when I was a young girl. He had 5 kinds of knives and daggers, and I can't tell you how awkward and uncomfortable it was for his partner. All eyes were turned towards Dr. Pender. I knew the truth, said he, 5 years after that tragedy occurred. It came in the shape of a letter written to me by Elliot Hayden. He said in it that he fancied that I had always suspected him. He said it was a sudden temptation. He too loved Diana Ashley, but he was only a poor, struggling barrister. With Richard out of the way and inheriting his title and estates, he saw a wonderful prospect opening up before him. The dagger had jerked out of his belt as he knelt down by his cousin, and almost before he had time to think, he drove it in and returned it to his belt again. He stabbed himself later in order to divert suspicion. He wrote to me on the eve of starting on an expedition to the South Pole in case, as he said, he should never come back. I do not think that he meant to come back, and I know that, as Miss Marple has said, his crime profited him nothing. For 5 years, he wrote, I have lived in hell. I hope, at least, that I may expiate my crime by dying honorably. There was a pause. And he did die honorably, said Sir Henry. You have changed the names in your story, Dr. Pender, but I think I recognize the man you mean. As I said, went on the old clergyman, I do not think that explanation quite covers the facts. I still think there was an evil influence in that grove, an influence that directed Elliot Hayden's action. Even to this day, I can never think without a shudder of the idle house of Astarte. Chapter 3. Ingots of Gold. I do not know that the story that I am going to tell you is a fair one, said Raymond West, because I can't give you the solution of it. Yet the facts were so interesting and so curious that I should like to propound it to you as a problem, and perhaps between us we may arrive at some logical conclusion. The date of these happenings was 2 years ago, when I went down to spend Whitsuntide with a man called John Newman in Cornwall. Cornwall, said Joyce Lempriere sharply. Yes. Why? Nothing. Only it's odd. My story is about a place in Cornwall, to a little fishing village called Rat Hole. Don't tell me yours is the same. No. My village is called Polperron. It is situated on the west coast of Cornwall, a very wild and rocky spot. I had been introduced a few weeks previously and had found him a most interesting companion, a man of intelligence and independent means. He was possessed of a romantic imagination. As a result of his latest hobby, he had taken the lease of Paul House. He was an authority on Elizabethan times, and he described to me in vivid and graphic language the route of the Spanish Armada. So enthusiastic was he that one could almost imagine that he had been an eyewitness at the scene. Is there anything in reincarnation, I wonder, I very much wonder? You are so romantic, Raymond, dear, said Miss Marple, looking benignantly at him. Romantic is the last thing that I am, said Raymond West, slightly annoyed. But this fellow Newman was chock full of it, and he interested me for that reason as a curious survival of the past. It appears that a certain ship belonging to the Armada, and known to contain a vast amount of treasure in the form of gold from the Spanish Main, was wrecked off the coast of Cornwall on the famous and treacherous Serpent Rocks for some years, so Newman told me. Attempts had been made to salve the ship and recover the treasure. I believe such stories are not uncommon, though the number of mythical treasure ships is largely in excess of the genuine ones. A company had been formed, but had gone bankrupt, and Newman had been able to buy the rights of the thing, or whatever you call it, for a mere song. He waxed very enthusiastic about it all. According to him, it was merely a question of the latest scientific, up-to-date machinery. The gold was there, and he had no doubt whatever that it could be recovered. It occurred to me, as I listened to him, how often things happen that way. A rich man such as Newman succeeds almost without effort, and yet in all probability the actual value in money of his find would mean little to him. I must say that his ardor infected me. I saw galleons drifting up the coast, flying before the storm, beaten and broken on the black rocks. The mere word galleon has a romantic sound. The phrase Spanish gold thrills the schoolboy and the grown-up man also. Moreover, I was working at the time upon a novel, some scenes of which were laid in the 16th century, and I saw the prospect of getting valuable local color from my host. I set off that Friday morning from Paddington in high spirits and looking forward to my trip. The carriage was empty, except for one man, who sat facing me in the opposite corner. He was a tall, soldierly-looking man, and I could not rid myself of the impression that somewhere or other I had seen him before. I cudgeled my brains for some time in vain, but at last I had it. My traveling companion was Inspector Badgeworth, and I had run across him when I was doing a series of articles on the Everson disappearance case. I recalled myself to his notice, and we were soon chatting pleasantly enough. When I told him I was going to Polperron, he remarked that that was a rum coincidence, because he himself was also bound for that place. I did not like to seem inquisitive, so was careful not to ask him what took him there. Instead, I spoke of my own interest in the place, and mentioned the wrecked Spanish galleon. To my surprise, the inspector seemed to know all about it. "That will be the Juan Fernandez," he said. "Your friend won't be the first who has sunk money trying to get money out of her. It is a romantic notion, and probably the whole story is a myth." I said, "No ship was ever wrecked there at all." "Oh, the ship was sunk there right enough," said the inspector along with a good company of others. "You would be surprised if you knew how many wrecks there are on that part of the coast. As a matter of fact, that is what takes me down there now. That is where the Otranto was wrecked 6 months ago. I remember reading about it." I said, "No lives were lost." "I think no lives were lost," said the inspector, "but something else was lost. It is not generally known, but the Otranto was carrying bullion. Yes, I said, much interested. Naturally, we have had divers at work on salvage operations. But the gold has gone, Mr. West. Gone, I said, staring at him. How can it have gone? That is the question, said the inspector. The rocks tore a gaping hole in her strong room. It was easy enough for the divers to get in that way, but they found the strong room empty. The question is, was the gold stolen before the wreck or afterwards? Was it ever in the strong room at all? It seems a curious case, I said. It is a very curious case when you consider what bullion is, not a diamond necklace that you could put into your pocket. When you think how cumbersome it is and how bulky, well, the whole thing seems absolutely impossible. There may have been some hocus pocus before the ship sailed, but if not, it must have been removed within the last 6 months, and I am going down to look into the matter. I found Newman, waiting to meet me at the station. He apologized for the absence of his car, which had gone to Truro for some necessary repairs. Instead, he met me with a farm lorry belonging to the property. I swung myself up beside him, and we wound carefully in and out of the narrow streets of the fishing village. We went up a steep ascent, with a gradient, I should say, of 1 in 5, ran a little distance along a winding lane, and turned in at the granite-pillared gates of Paul House. The place was a charming one. It was situated high up the cliffs, with a good view out to sea. Part of it was some 300 or 400 years old, and a modern wing had been added. Behind it, farming land of about 7 or 8 acres ran inland. "Welcome to Paul House," said Newman, "and to the sign of the Golden Galleon," and he pointed to where, over the front door, hung a perfect reproduction of a Spanish galleon with all sails set. My first evening was a most charming and instructive one. My host showed me the old manuscripts relating to the Juan Fernandez. He unrolled charts for me and indicated positions on them with dotted lines, and he produced plans of diving apparatus, which, I may say, mystified me utterly and completely. I told him of my meeting with Inspector Badgeworth, in which he was much interested. They are a queer people round this coast. He said reflectively, smuggling and wrecking is in their blood. When a ship goes down on their coast, they cannot help regarding it as lawful plunder meant for their pockets. There is a fellow here I should like you to see. He is an interesting survival. Next day dawned bright and clear. I was taken down into Polperron, and there introduced to Newman's diver, a man called Higgins. He was a wooden-faced individual, extremely taciturn, and his contributions to the conversation were mostly monosyllables. After a discussion between them on highly technical matters, we adjourned to the Three Anchors. A tankard of beer somewhat loosened the worthy fellow's tongue. "Detective gentleman from London has come down," he grunted. "They do say that that ship that went down there last November was carrying a mortal lot of gold. Well, she wasn't the first to go down, and she won't be the last." "Here, here," chimed in the landlord of the Three Anchors. "That is a true word you say there. Bill Higgins, I reckon it is." "Mr. Kelvin," said Higgins. I looked with some curiosity at the landlord. He was a remarkable-looking man, dark and swarthy, with curiously broad shoulders. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had a curiously furtive way of avoiding one's glance. I suspected that this was the man of whom Newman had spoken, saying he was an interesting survival. "We don't want interfering foreigners on this coast," he said, somewhat truculently. "Meaning the police?" asked Newman, smiling. "Meaning the police and others. said Kelvin significantly. And don't you forget it, Mr. Do you know, Newman? That sounded to me very like a threat. I said as we climbed the hill homewards. My friend laughed. Nonsense. I don't do the folk down here any harm. I shook my head doubtfully. There was something sinister and uncivilized about Kelvin. I felt that his mind might run in strange, unrecognized channels. I think I date the beginning of my uneasiness from that moment. I had slept well enough that first night, but the next night my sleep was troubled and broken. Sunday dawned, dark and sullen, with an overcast sky and the threatenings of thunder in the air. I am always a bad hand at hiding my feelings. And Newman noticed the change in me. What is the matter with you? West, you are a bundle of nerves this morning. I don't know. I confessed, but I have got a horrible feeling of foreboding. It's the weather. Yes, perhaps. I said no more. In the afternoon, we went out in Newman's motorboat, but the rain came on with such vigor that we were glad to return to shore and change into dry clothing. And that evening, my uneasiness increased. Outside, the storm howled and roared. Towards 10 o'clock, the tempest calmed down. Newman looked out of the window. It is clearing. He said, I shouldn't wonder if it was a perfectly fine night in another half hour. If so, I shall go out for a stroll. I yawned. I am frightfully sleepy. I said, I didn't get much sleep last night. I think that tonight I shall turn in early. This I did. On the previous night, I had slept little. Tonight, I slept heavily. Yet my slumbers were not restful. I was still oppressed with an awful foreboding of evil. I had terrible dreams. I dreamt of dreadful abysses and vast chasms, amongst which I was wandering, knowing that a slip of the foot meant death. I waked to find the hands of my clock pointing to 8 o'clock. My head was aching badly, and the terror of my night's dreams was still upon me. So strongly was this, so that when I went to the window and drew it up, I started back with a fresh feeling of terror. For the first thing I saw, or thought I saw, was a man digging an open grave. It took me a minute or two to pull myself together. Then I realized that the grave digger was Newman's gardener, and the grave was destined to accommodate 3 new rose trees, which were lying on the turf waiting for the moment they should be securely planted in the earth. The gardener looked up and saw me and touched his hat. Good morning, sir. Nice morning, sir. I suppose it is, I said doubtfully, still unable to shake off completely the depression of my spirits. However, as the gardener had said, it was certainly a nice morning. The sun was shining and the sky a clear, pale blue that promised fine weather for the day. I went down to breakfast, whistling a tune. Newman had no maids living in the house. 2 middle-aged sisters, who lived in a farmhouse nearby, came daily to attend to his simple wants. One of them was placing the coffee pot on the table as I entered the room. Good morning, Elizabeth. I said, Mr. Newman not down yet. He must have been out very early. Sir, she replied, he wasn't in the house when we arrived. Instantly, my uneasiness returned. On the 2 previous mornings, Newman had come down to breakfast somewhat late, and I didn't fancy that at any time he was an early riser, moved by those forebodings. I ran up to his bedroom. It was empty, and, moreover, His bed had not been slept in. A brief examination of his room showed me two other things. If Newman had gone out for a stroll, he must have gone out in his evening clothes, for they were missing. I was sure now that my premonition of evil was justified. Newman had gone, as he had said he would do, for an evening stroll. For some reason or other, he had not returned. Why? Had he met with an accident fallen over the cliffs? A search must be made at once. In a few hours, I had collected a large band of helpers, and together we hunted in every direction along the cliffs and on the rocks below. But there was no sign of Newman. In the end, in despair, I sought out Inspector Badgeworth. His face grew very grave. "It looks to me as if there has been foul play," he said. "There are some not over-scrupulous customers in these parts. Have you seen Kelvin, the landlord of the Three Anchors?" I said that I had seen him. "Did you know he did a turn in jail 4 years ago? Assault and battery." "It doesn't surprise me," I said. "The general opinion in this place seems to be that your friend is a bit too fond of nosing his way into things that do not concern him. I hope he has come to no serious harm." The search was continued with redoubled vigor. It was not until late that afternoon that our efforts were rewarded. We discovered Newman in a deep ditch in a corner of his own property. His hands and feet were securely fastened with rope, uncanny, and a handkerchief had been thrust into his mouth and secured there so as to prevent him crying out. He was terribly exhausted and in great pain, but after some frictioning of his wrists and ankles and a long draught from a whiskey flask, he was able to give his account of what had occurred. The weather having cleared, he had gone out for a stroll about 11 o'clock. His way had taken him some distance along the cliffs to a spot commonly known as Smuggler's Cove, owing to the large number of caves to be found there. Here he had noticed some men landing something from a small boat, and had strolled down to see what was going on. Whatever the stuff was, it seemed to be a great weight, and it was being carried into one of the farthermost caves, with no real suspicion of anything being amiss. Nevertheless, Newman had wondered. He had drawn quite near them without being observed. Suddenly, there was a cry of alarm, and immediately the two powerful seafaring men had set upon him and rendered him unconscious. When next he came to himself, he found himself lying on a motor vehicle of some kind, which was proceeding, with many bumps and bangs, as far as he could guess, up the lane which led from the coast to the village. To his great surprise, the lorry turned in at the gate of his own house. There, after a whispered conversation between the men, they at length drew him forth and flung him into a ditch, at a spot where the depth of it rendered discovery unlikely for some time. Then the lorry drove on, and, he thought, passed out through another gate some quarter of a mile nearer the village. He could give no description of his assailants, except that they were certainly seafaring men, and, by their speech, Cornishmen. Inspector Badgeworth was very interested. Depend upon it, that is where the stuff has been hidden. He cried, "Somehow or other, it has been salvaged from the wreck and has been stored in some lonely cave somewhere. It is known that we have searched all the caves in Smuggler's Cove, and that we are now going farther afield, and they have evidently been moving the stuff at night to a cave that has been already searched and is not likely to be searched again. Unfortunately, they have had at least 18 hours to dispose of the stuff. If they got Mr. Newman last night, I doubt if we will find any of it there by now." The inspector hurried off to make a search. He found definite evidence that the bullion had been stored as supposed, but the gold had been once more removed, and there was no clue as to its fresh hiding place. One clue there was, however, and the inspector himself pointed it out to me the following morning. That lane is very largely used by motor vehicles, he said, and in one or two places we get the traces of the tires very clearly. There is a three-cornered piece out of one tire, leaving a mark which is quite unmistakable. It shows going into the gate. Here and there is a faint mark of it going out of the other gate, so there is not much doubt that it is the right vehicle we are after. Now, why did they take it out through the farther gate? It seems quite clear to me that the lorry came from the village. Now, there aren't many people who own a lorry in the village, not more than 2 or 3 at most. Kelvin, the landlord of the Three Anchors, has one. What was Kelvin's original profession? Asked Newman. It is curious that you should ask me that, Mr. Newman. In his young days, Kelvin was a professional diver. Newman and I looked at each other. The puzzle seemed to be fitting itself together piece by piece. You didn't recognize Kelvin as one of the men on the beach? Asked the inspector. Newman shook his head. I am afraid I can't say anything as to that. He said regretfully, I really hadn't time to see anything. The inspector very kindly allowed me to accompany him to the Three Anchors. The garage was up a side street. The big doors were closed, but by going up a little alley at the side, we found a small door that led into it, and the door was open. A very brief examination of the tires sufficed for the inspector. We have got him. By Jove, he exclaimed. Here is the mark, as large as life on the rear left wheel. Now, Mr. Kelvin, I don't think you will be clever enough to wriggle out of this. Raymond West came to a halt. Well, said Joyce, so far, I don't see anything to make a problem about unless they never found the gold. They never found the gold, certainly, said Raymond. And they never got Kelvin either. I expect he was too clever for them, but I don't quite see how he worked it. He was duly arrested on the evidence of the tire mark. But an extraordinary hitch arose. Just opposite the big doors of the garage was a cottage rented for the summer by a lady artist. Oh, these lady artists, said Joyce, laughing. As you say? Oh, these lady artists. This particular one had been ill for some weeks, and in consequence, had 2 hospital nurses attending her. The nurse who was on night duty had pulled her armchair up to the window, where the blind was up. She declared that the motor lorry could not have left the garage opposite without her seeing it, and she swore that in actual fact it never left the garage that night. I don't think that is much of a problem, said Joyce. The nurse went to sleep. Of course. They always do. That has been known to happen, said Mr. Petherick, judiciously, but it seems to me that we are accepting facts without sufficient examination. Before accepting the testimony of the hospital nurse, we should inquire very closely into her bona fides. The alibi coming with such suspicious promptness is inclined to raise doubts in one's mind. There is also the lady artist's testimony, said Raymond. She declared that she was in pain and awake most of the night, and that she would certainly have heard the lorry, it being an unusual noise, and the night being very quiet after the storm. Said the clergyman. That is certainly an additional fact. Had Kelvin himself any alibi? He declared that he was at home and in bed from 10 o'clock onwards, but he could produce no witnesses in support of that statement. The nurse went to sleep, said Joyce. And so did the patient. Ill people always think they have never slept a wink all night. Raymond West looked inquiringly at Dr. Pender. Do you know, I feel very sorry for that man, Kelvin. It seems to me very much a case of give a dog a bad name. Kelvin had been in prison. Apart from the tire mark, which certainly seems too remarkable to be coincidence, there doesn't seem to be much against him, except his unfortunate record. You, Sir Henry. Sir Henry shook his head. As it happens, he said, smiling, I know something about this case. So clearly I mustn't speak. Well, go on, Aunt Jane. Haven't you got anything to say? In a minute. Dear, said Miss Marple, I am afraid I have counted wrong. 2 pearl, 3 plain. Slip 1, 2 pearl. Yes, that's right. What did you say? Dear. What is your opinion? You wouldn't like my opinion. Dear. Young people never do. I notice. It is better to say nothing. Nonsense. Aunt Jane, out with it. Well, dear Raymond, said Miss Marple, laying down her knitting and looking across at her nephew, I do think you should be more careful how you choose your friends. You are so credulous, dear, so easily gulled. I suppose it is being a writer and having so much imagination. All that story about a Spanish galleon. If you were older and had more experience of life, you would have been on your guard at once. A man you had known only a few weeks. 2. Sir Henry suddenly gave vent to a great roar of laughter and slapped his knee. Got you this time, Raymond, he said. Miss Marple, you are wonderful. Your friend Newman, my boy, has another name, several other names, in fact. At the present moment, he is not in Cornwall, but in Devonshire Dartmoor. To be exact, a convict in Princetown Prison. We didn't catch him over the stolen bullion business, but over the rifling of the strong room of one of the London banks. Then we looked up his past record, and we found a good portion of the gold, stolen, buried in the garden at Paul House. It was rather a neat idea. All along that Cornish coast, there are stories of wrecked galleons full of gold. It accounted for the diver, and it would account later for the gold. But a scapegoat was needed, and Kelvin was ideal for the purpose. Newman played his little comedy very well, and our friend Raymond, with his celebrity as a writer, made an unimpeachable witness. But the tire mark, objected Joyce. Oh, I saw that at once. Dear, although I know nothing about motors, said Miss Marple. People change a wheel. You know I have often seen them doing it, and, of course, they could take a wheel off Kelvin's lorry and take it out through the small door into the alley and put it on to Mr. Newman's lorry and take the lorry out of one gate down to the beach, fill it up with the gold, and bring it up through the other gate. And then they must have taken the wheel back and put it back on Mr. Kelvin's lorry, while, I suppose, someone else was tying up Mr. Newman in a ditch. Very uncomfortable for him, and probably longer before he was found than he expected. I suppose the man who called himself the gardener attended to that side of the business. Why do you say, called himself the gardener? Aunt Jane, asked Raymond curiously. Well, he can't have been a real gardener, can he? Said Miss Marple. Gardeners don't work on Whit Monday. Everybody knows that. She smiled and folded up her knitting. It was really that little fact that put me on the right scent, she said. She looked across at Raymond. When you are a householder, dear, and have a garden of your own, you will know these little things. Chapter 4. You saw the blood, but it wasn't hers. You didn't mean to see it. You weren't even looking for anything that morning. Just light shadow, the right angles for the painting you were working on. Cornwall's stone pavement always had charm jagged, salt-eaten, reliable in its silence, until that moment. Mausam, Amsham, Rina, Aonin, until the blood appeared, dark, soaked into the cracks between the slabs, like the sea was bleeding through the earth. It was there, and then it wasn't, just like Marjorie. They told you she drowned. A swimming accident. Currents, undertow, rocks, nothing to be done. But you know better. You saw the blood before they found her. You saw her husband, Edward Denman, walking away from the harbor with his sleeves rolled down. And you saw how he smiled at the constable. The kind of smile that isn't relief. It's release. The funeral came fast. Too fast. Rain soaked the ground. The village turned out in full black, murmuring about what a shame it was. What a lovely girl Marjorie had been. Not one word about the blood. Not one whisper about what you'd seen. You tried. Told them. Mrs. Bartlett at the tea shop laughed. Said you'd been working too much. Artists always see what no one else does, she said. Pouring milk. Not always a good thing. Dear, even Miss Marple said nothing. Just looked at you. Kind eyes. Worried, but quiet. You sit in your rented room and stare at the sketchbook. The one you used that day. There it is. The pavement, drawn before the blood. But somehow, you can almost see the stain there. Ghosted into the graphite. You think about burning it. Oh. Then you think about Edward, still in the village, still smiling, still walking past the pub like a man who got away with it. You wonder if anyone else noticed the change in his shoes. The new pair, polished, uncreased. You wonder where the old ones went. That night, someone knocks on your door. You freeze. The fire's low. Shadows stretch long and sharp across the wooden walls. You don't move. The knock comes again. Tnen. 3 slow taps. Then silence. You wait. Nothing. Then a whisper. Your name. Joyce. You jerk the door open. No one there. Just a white envelope on the ground. You tear it open. Inside a single note. Scrawled in red pencil. She wasn't the only one. You step back. The cold crawling up your spine like fingers on a piano. Somewhere in this village, someone knows what you saw, and now they know you're not letting it go. Chapter 5. You try to leave town, but something's already following you. You pack before sunrise, not because you're frightened, though you are, but because you know how this village works. They don't chase you with pitchforks. They smother you with silence. And right now, the air outside feels too quiet. You throw sketchbooks into your bag, charcoal pencils, blades. The envelope with the red message sits on the table like an accusation. You hesitate, then tuck it inside your coat. Something tells you you're going to need it. The landlady is already up when you come down the stairs. She's polishing the banister. Hasn't done that in months. Won't meet your eyes. Leaving early, Miss Lempriere. Just a sudden change of plan. Pity. She doesn't ask where you're going. Doesn't say goodbye. Just resumes polishing. The sound of cloth against wood is the only thing that follows you out the door. The train station is foggy, half hidden by sea mist. Only one man at the counter, and he doesn't smile. No trains till noon. There's usually a freight at 8. Not today. You feel it then, not panic. Pressure. Like someone's placed a hand on your back and started to push. You step away from the counter and walk. Not far. Just enough to see the station master take a telephone off the hook. petite, and make a call. You duck into the alley behind the pub. The fog's thicker here. The scent of beer and brine and coal ash cling to the bricks. Your boots splash in a puddle, and something moves behind you. You turn. Nothing. Only the fog. Only the echo of your name. Stretched thin and swallowed by the sea. You make it to the harbor. Fishing boats bob gently in the water. Ropes creaking. One of them is named Marjorie. Fresh paint, still wet. Your throat tightens. You walk faster, past the nets, the crates, the gulls circling like they know what's under the surface. You're almost to the edge of the pier when you see his coat, hanging on a hook, brown wool, familiar cut, stained cuffs, Edward Denman's, and inside the pocket, because you're already reaching for it, before your mind catches up, is another note. Same red pencil. Don't run. You'll only drown tired. You spin around. Nobody, just water, waves slapping the dock. Then you hear it. Footsteps. Not fast, just steady, measured, like whoever they belong to isn't in a hurry, like they know you don't have anywhere left to go. You run, back through the fog, through alleys and back streets, past windows that close when you pass. You reach your room, lock the door, pull the curtains, then sink to the floor with the coat in your hands and the envelope pressed against your chest like a prayer. And for the first time since she died, you whisper her name aloud. Marjorie. The silence answers. Then the phone rings. You crawl to it, lift the receiver, crackling static, then a voice. A man's, not Edward's, older, measured. You saw too much, Miss Lempriere. Who are you? A pause. I'm the one who cleans the blood, so no one else has to see it. Click. The line goes dead, and you realize you're not dealing with a man. You're dealing with a system, something older than law, older than Miss Marple's logic, something that runs on secrets, silence, and the promise that some deaths are better left unexplained. And now you're inside it. Worse, you're the one who cracked it open. Chapter 6. You try to leave town, but something's already following you. You pack before sunrise, not because you're frightened, though you are, but because you know how this village works. They don't chase you with pitchforks. They smother you with silence. Ja saillant. And right now, the air outside feels too quiet. You throw sketchbooks into your bag, charcoal pencils, blades. The envelope with the red message sits on the table like an accusation. You hesitate, then tuck it inside your coat. Something tells you you're going to need it. The landlady is already up when you come down the stairs. She's polishing the banister. Hasn't done that in months. Won't meet your eyes. Leaving early. Miss Lempriere. Just a sudden change of plan. Pity. She doesn't ask where you're going. Doesn't say goodbye. Just resumes polishing. The sound of cloth against wood is the only thing that follows you out the door. The train station is foggy, half hidden by sea mist. Only one man at the counter, and he doesn't smile. No trains till noon. There's usually a freight at 8 Eva. Not today. You feel it then, not panic. Pressure, like someone's placed a hand on your back and started to push. You step away from the counter and walk. You will go to Masaki. Not far, just enough to see the station master take a telephone off the hook and make a call. You duck into the alley behind the pub. The fog's thicker here. The scent of beer and brine and coal ash cling to the bricks. Your boots splash in a puddle, and something moves behind you. You turn. Nothing. Only the fog. Only the echo of your name. Stretched thin and swallowed by the sea, you make it to the harbor. Fishing boats bob gently in the water. Ropes creaking. One of them is named Marjorie. Fresh paint. Still wet. Your throat tightens. You walk faster, past the nets, the crates, the gulls circling like they know what's under the surface. You're almost to the edge of the pier when you see his coat. Comanchita. Hanging on a hook, brown wool, familiar cut, stained cuffs, Edward Denman's, and inside the pocket, because you're already reaching for it, before your mind catches up, is another note. Same red pencil. Pure pencil. Don't run. You'll only drown tired. You spin around. Nobody, just water, waves slapping the dock. Then you hear it. Footsteps. Not fast, just steady. Measured, like whoever they belong to isn't in a hurry, like they know you don't have anywhere left to go. You run back through the fog, through alleys and back streets, past windows that close when you pass. You reach your room, lock the door, pull the curtains, then sink to the floor with the coat in your hands and the envelope pressed against your chest like a prayer. And for the first time since she died, you whisper her name aloud. Marjorie. The silence answers. Then the phone rings. You crawl to it, lift the receiver. Crackling static. Then a voice. A man's, not Edward's. Older, measured. You saw too much. Miss Lempriere. Who are you? A pause. I'm the one who cleans the blood, so no one else has to see it. Click. The line goes dead, and you realize you're not dealing with a man. You're dealing with a system. Something older than law, older than Miss Marple's logic. Something that runs on secrets, silence, and the promise that some deaths are better left unexplained. And now you're inside it. Worse, you're the one who cracked it open. Chapter 7. You go back to where it happened, and the blood is still there. You return to the pavement before dawn. Same corner, same stones. The salt wind slices through your coat, but you barely feel it. Oh, you're watching the ground because you remember exactly where the blood pooled, and even if the village wants you to forget, you don't. The sun creeps up behind the cliffs. The sky bleeds orange and rust. And just as the light hits the third slab from the edge, there it is. A fresh smear. Red, slick, new, not imagined. Not like before. You crouch down, fingers trembling as you reach out. Still warm. Still wet. You jerk your hand back, but it's too late. It's on your fingertips. And now it's on your sketchbook. You didn't bring it with you. You left it locked in your room. But there it is, propped neatly against the harbor railing, open to the same page. The one where you drew the pavement, now with a crimson fingerprint pressed over the center. Yours. You can't be sure anymore. A cough behind you. You turn fast. It's her. Miss Marple. Wool coat. Gloves. That unreadable look in her eyes. You came back, she says. You knew I would. She nods, then walks past you, kneels beside the blood, takes out a white linen handkerchief, blots the stain, folds it carefully, puts it in her bag. You stare. You believe me now. She doesn't answer. Instead, this village has a way of preserving what it wants and burying what it doesn't. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give you, and still sleep at night. You follow her up the stone steps toward the bakery, but something's changed. The people on the street aren't pretending anymore. They're watching from behind lace curtains, from fogged glass windows, from shadows where their faces don't show. You see Edward Denman leaning against a postbox, chewing something. He doesn't smile this time, just watches, like a man who knows he's already won. Inside the bakery, Marple orders tea, as if this is just another morning. You sit across from her, still tasting the salt and metal of fear. It wasn't just Marjorie. You say, "No," she replies softly. "It never is." You lean closer. "Who else?" She hesitates. "There was another girl before Marjorie. Same man, same whispers, different village." "What happened to her?" "No one knows. She vanished." A pause. "Some say she fell from the cliffs. And you, I think she was pushed." You walk home alone. The sky's gray now. Rain's coming. And still, the blood hasn't washed away. You pass the painter's shop on the corner. A new painting in the window. Yours. You never gave it to them. And yet there it is. The harbor, the pavement, and at the center a smear of red paint that wasn't in your sketch. Someone has entered your mind, your art, your truth. You step back, then notice the tag, written in careful cursive, titled "The Last Witness." Not for sale. Back in your room, the window is open. You never left it that way. The smell of sea air and something else, something coppery, curls through the space. On your bed, another note. This one typed, "Keep painting. Keep bleeding. We like what you're becoming." You crumple it. But it's too late, because you feel it now. Deep in your bones, you're no longer the observer. You're part of the picture. And this village, it's not done with you yet. Chapter 9. They show you the portrait and you realize it was never Marjorie they wanted. The gallery is only open by appointment, which is strange, because yesterday it didn't exist. A blue painted door on Hollow Street, between the butcher's and the shuttered apothecary. No sign, no bell, just a card slipped under your door that morning. Your work deserves the right light. 3 p.m. Don't be late. You shouldn't go. You know that, but your feet move anyway. Inside, the air is still, dustless, like no one has ever breathed here. The walls are lined with paintings. Yours, every one of them. Except you never painted these. There's one of the harbor, lit in the same violet you love. But the shadows are wrong. Too long. Too many. Another shows the bakery. But the window panes reflect something behind you, something not in the street. And then, at the end of the room, framed in black wood, her, but not Marjorie. It's you. Your face, but not quite. The eyes are too wide, too alert, too terrified. A smear of red across your collarbone. A background of pavement and sea. Title engraved on a small brass plaque. Study in disappearance number 3. You reach out. A voice stops you. Please. Oils take time to dry. You turn. It's Edward Denman, smiling, like always. Except this time, you see it. The emptiness behind the teeth. I knew you'd come, he says. You always do. You take a step back. What is this? A gallery, he shrugs, of endings. You try to leave. He steps aside. Doesn't block you. But you feel it anyway. The walls curve now, like the room is folding in on itself, like it won't let you go until it's shown you everything. He gestures toward another painting. This one is of Marjorie, only she's smiling, alive, and you're in the background, watching, always watching. It was never about her, Edward says. She was just a door. You're the key. You shake your head. I saw the blood. No, he corrects. You saw your blood. You stumble back. Your hands tremble. Your sketchbook slips from your coat. Lands open. There on a page you swear was blank is the portrait of your face. And this time, the red is moving, spreading. They always paint it before it happens, he says. Voice gentle. The best ones do. You run out into the street. The sky is bleeding now. Too heavy. Iron-colored clouds stretched low and slow like a wound. You don't know where to go. Only that this isn't just about Marjorie anymore. It never was. This has been about you from the beginning. You who noticed too much. You who asked the wrong questions. You whose art refused to lie. Back in your room, you find the mirror turned to the wall. You didn't leave it that way. On your easel, the canvas waits, blank, except for a faint brush stroke in the bottom right corner. Picture, red, and a signature, yours. Even though you haven't picked up a brush since the funeral, you stare at the canvas. And for a moment, just a moment, you wonder what's easier, painting the truth or letting someone else finish your story for you. Chapter 10. You remember a name they told you to forget, and she's still missing. It starts with a whisper in the bakery queue. A name too soft to be meant for you, but it finds you anyway. Vera Blake. You freeze. The woman ahead of you keeps chatting, folding her change. The man behind just coughs. I'm Yakum. But the name hangs there, sharp, out of place, like blood on white linen. You know that name. Not well, just in passing. A girl from another summer, another season, another sketch. She posed for you once in the gardens behind the chapel. Light brown hair, eyes that didn't blink enough. You remember the way she stood, like she was listening for something behind her all the time. Then one day, gone. No one talked much, just said she'd moved, found work elsewhere. You were new to the village then, and you didn't press. But now, 5 years later, her name crawls back from wherever they buried it. You go home, dig through old sketchbooks. Okay. Page after page until there, the drawing, her face, half turned, wind catching her collar, and behind her, something you didn't notice until now. A shadow, too long to be hers. You take the sketch to Miss Marple. She answers the door slowly, eyes sharper than usual. She doesn't ask why you're there. She just looks at the page and sighs. I told them not to use Vera. You blink, use. She was too clever. Marple says, too curious. Like you. She motions you inside, locks the door behind. The fire is lit, but the room feels cold. No? Why didn't anyone look for her? You ask. Because they were told she wasn't missing? By who? By the people who decide such things. Edward. She laughs. Hollow. Edward's a tool. Charming. Disposable. Replaceable. You sit, your hands gripping the sketch. So what happened to her? Marple leans in. The same thing that happens to anyone who sees too much. They erase you, but not all at once. She gestures toward you. First your memory, then your name, then your art. You whisper, but someone left that note. Someone wants me to remember. Marple nods. That's the mistake they made with Vera. They let her draw too much. Leave too many traces. And me, you're her echo. That night, back in your room, you wake to the sound of the wind howling. Your sketchbook lies open. The drawing of Vera is gone, ripped cleanly from the binding. You run to the window, footprints in the frost, not leading to your window, but away from it, toward the cliffs. You follow, no coat, no shoes, just instinct. The wind tears at your skin, the moon's high. When you reach the edge, you see something in the rocks below, a splash of white. You climb down, careful, silent, there, tucked between stones, held down by a rusted anchor chain. A page, your page, the drawing of Vera, now painted over in black gouache, except one thing left untouched. Her eyes, looking straight at you, and written beside them, in small block letters, I never left. You step back, The tide crashes. Kaishas. But the page doesn't move. And in that moment, you know, you're not just following a ghost. You've become her replacement. Chapter 11. You return her eyes to the gallery, and they hang it without a word. You wrap the page in oilcloth, not to protect it, but to keep it from bleeding. There's something alive in the paper now, something that doesn't want to stay still. You feel it hum in your coat pocket as you make your way back through the morning fog. No one sees you, or maybe they do, and just look away faster now. That's how this village survives. Pretend long enough, and the crime becomes scenery. The gallery door is unlocked, and of course it is. Same hollow air, same stillness, same soft echo of your own footsteps growing fainter. Until they feel like someone else's, you lay the page on the nearest table. No one stops you, no one greets you, but a space opens up on the far wall between Study in Disappearance number 3 and a painting titled Untitled She Knew. A perfect gap, waiting. You watch as nothing moves it, and yet it's hung, framed, no hands, no rope. Just now their title plaque appears like it's always been. V. Recovery in progress. You back away slowly, and the lights flicker once, as if in approval. Then a sound behind you, shoes on stone, not rushed, measured. You don't need to look to know it's Edward. She was difficult, you know. He says, "You don't speak." Vera wanted to show everyone the blood, too. But she didn't paint it like you do. She made it clinical, uninspired. He walks past you, taps the frame gently. But this is art. You want to scream. You want to tear it down. You want to ask what the hell he's doing with these women. These images. These erasures. But the word's not in your throat. He turns to you. You've reached the third stage. You blink. What stages? Witness? Vessel? Archive. He steps closer. You're the last now. That night, you return home to find your mirror replaced. Not turned away this time. Gone. In its place, a painting. Not one of yours, but you recognize the brushwork. Heavy, wet, deliberate. It's a portrait of Vera, looking over her shoulder, and behind her, you, holding a sketch pad, eyes wide, hands red. You step back. Trip on the rug, hit the floor. But the painting doesn't move. Neither does your shadow, except it's not matching your pose anymore. You crawl to your desk, grab charcoal, sketch blind, fast, terrified, because something is happening, and if you don't draw it, it'll take you instead. When you're done, you look. It's her face, not Vera, not Marjorie. Yours, mouth open, no eyes, just the empty sockets where someone else is looking through. From inside, you drop the pencil, and for the first time, you don't cry. You understand. This is how the system survives. It paints its secrets in you, and then it watches to see what you'll do with them. Chapter 12. You burn the frame. And something screams from inside the canvas. You don't remember deciding to do it, only the sound of your own breath. Fast, hard, like it belongs to someone being hunted. You stare at the portrait, you and Vera, trapped together in oils and shadows. It watches you, waits. You grab the frame. Wood bites into your palms. Splinters, dust, cold. Downstairs, you build the fire, not for warmth this time. For war, you toss kindling. Twist pages from your oldest sketchbook. The ones with the first whispers of something wrong. Your hands tremble, but not from fear now. From rage, you shove the frame in. It resists, catches slow, then crackles. The flames lick up its edges. But instead of silence, you hear it. A scream, not from the fire, from the painting. A sound like canvas tearing, but alive, human, and underneath it, A whisper layered in ash. Don't forget me again. The fire flares. Blinding orange. You fall back, shielding your face. Smoke coils with shapes in it. Eyes, fingers, sketch lines, and then gone. The room is scorched. But you're still breathing. Still here? The fire died too fast. Almost like it was fed enough. You check the ashes. Nothing left. Wow. Ifas. Not even nails. Only a single thing remains on the hearth. A red pencil. Unburnt, sharp, and carved into its side. In tiny, etched lettering. Property of V.B. You hold it like a relic, and the truth hits you. She tried this too. Vera tried to fight, to destroy what they made of her. But she failed. Or maybe they let her think she failed, to see what she'd become next. You walk back upstairs. Your walls are bare. Your sketch is gone. Even the gouache-stained page you found on the rocks vanished. And in their place, fresh canvases. Blank? Dozens. Waiting. And on the desk, a list. I'm typed neatly. Names, dates, places. At the bottom, current custodian. Joyce Lempriere. Medium emotional trauma. Visual interpretation. Stage 3 of 3. Archive engaged, new assignments to follow. You stagger back. This isn't about murder. This is curation. You're not being erased. You're being recruited. The blood you saw was real, but the stains were never random. They were chosen, framed, documented. You, Vera, Marjorie, others, every tragedy turned into composition. Every death, another entry in a gallery only the shadows admire. And now, you've been given the pencil, but before you can destroy the list, a knock comes at your door. Not fast, not slow, just 3 deliberate raps. You open it. No one there, only a wrapped parcel. Inside a canvas, already painted, already signed. You unroll it slowly. The signature reads, Joyce Lempriere, Curator, Num. 12. And the title, Next to Die, Chapter 13. You try to warn the village, but they've been waiting for you to finally see it. You don't sleep. The canvas sits rolled on your desk like a threat in waiting. You stare at it. Then you stare at your hands, still stained with charcoal, still yours for now. By morning, the village has returned to normal, or at least what they call normal. Children skipping rope outside the grocer's, fishermen hauling nets in silence, the postman tipping his hat just slightly, like always. Gauchis, you pass them all. The red pencil clutched in your coat, your mouth dry, your breath shallow. You try anyway. They're watching us. You say to the florist. She blinks, then smiles. Isn't that the point? At the bakery, you slam the canvas down on the counter. This is real. You hiss. This is me. They painted it before it happened. The baker, Mr. Ellis, studies it, then nods, not shocked, not disturbed, just resigned. You lasted longer than Vera. You freeze. You knew, he shrugs. Somebody has to become the next frame. You stumble out, heart hammering. Every face you pass isn't shocked, isn't worried. They look at you like a guest overstaying their welcome. Like you missed the invitation to the unveiling. You sprint to the vicarage, pound on the door. Miss Marple opens. No tea, no smile, just a tired kind of sorrow. I was hoping you wouldn't get this far. You knew. You whisper all along. She nods, steps aside. Inside, the sitting room has been cleared. Only one object remains, an easel, and resting on it, a blank canvas. They always give you one last chance. Marple says to choose what to paint before they finish you themselves. I won't do it. You already are. You stare at her, at her hands. No gloves this time. You see it now? Paint under her fingernails. Not fresh, old, dry, layered. She's not just a bystander. She's part of the archive. How many have you watched, you ask? Too many, she says. And Vera, she sighs. Some paintings don't dry. You run! But where? Every door opens before you knock. Every window stares. No one locks anything here because no one wants out. And those who do become portrait studies. Filed, framed, forgotten, until the next observer arrives. By twilight, you're at the cliffs again, where Vera's sketch had been buried, where the scream had come through the fire, and where now a chair waits. Wooden, facing the sea, on the seat, a single brush and another canvas, propped on an easel made of old anchor chain. You sit because part of you knows it's already done. You pick up the brush. It's still wet, not with paint, with blood. Yours, hers, theirs, does it matter? You close your eyes and you begin to draw. But before the first stroke completes, you hear it, a voice. Soft, familiar. From behind, Joyce, don't finish it. You freeze, turn, and there she is. Vera, older, paler, but alive. Eyes hollow, hands trembling. She holds up a page, torn, smeared, but clear. I started mine, she says, but I never signed it. Chapter 14. You refuse to sign and the painting tries to finish itself. You stare at Vera's torn page. The edge is soaked with sea salt and something darker. The image is half-formed, a face with no mouth. Hands clutching at canvas. A scream forever trapped in brushstroke. She holds it like a warning, like a broken oath. If you finish it, she says softly, they'll hang it, frame it, and you'll be gone. So how are you still here? She looks down. I'm not sure I am. The wind picks up. The sea below thrashes. The chair creaks behind you like something breathing. You turn back. The canvas blank just moments ago is no longer empty. A line has appeared, then another. Your hand never moved, but the brush is floating, guided by something else. It draws your shoulders, your hair, your eyes, and in those eyes, fear. You try to drop the brush, but it's stuck to your fingers, hot, alive. The paint on the canvas pulses, red, then black, then both, and beneath the forming image, your signature begins to scratch itself in, letter by letter. J-O-E, you scream. Vera rushes forward, grabs your wrist, pulls the brush free. The canvas hisses. Together, you stumble back. The wind knocks over the easel. The painting falls flat on the rocks, but doesn't break. Instead, it bleeds. Actual blood, soaking into the cracks. You watch it pool. God, she bolts, then slither toward your feet. You run, back up the path. Vera behind you. She limps. You don't ask why. You think you already know. The cliff trail twists. Branches slash. Your breath scrapes raw. Until finally you burst through the brush into the village. Lights flicker. Doors creak. But the people, gone. Every shop empty. Every house hollow. Except one. The gallery. Lit. Open. Waiting. You step inside, and there front and center is the painting you just escaped. Already dry. Already signed. Already titled. Resigned. Joyce Lempriere, E. Curator number 12. Vera grabs your hand. They don't need you to finish it. They only need you to believe it. You stare at the frame, at yourself, looking back. And for the first time, you see something else in the reflection. Someone else painting you from the other side. It's not Edward. It's not Miss Marple. It's someone older, faceless, but steady, guiding the brush like a conductor guides a death march. Vera turns to you. If we want to stop them, We don't destroy the painting. We have to paint back. And Chapter 15. You paint them out of the frame, but they've been inside you all along. The gallery is silent, but not empty. The walls shift when you're not looking. Each frame hums, breathing like lungs that haven't exhaled in years. Vera stands beside you, trembling. She holds a palette of ash-colored pigments, none of them familiar. You carry the red pencil, sharpened to a needle's edge. We paint them out, she whispers. We name them with color, and then we unmake them. You kneel in front of the blank canvas, not one they gave you, one you dragged from the old chapel attic, still smelling of mildew and secrets. You pick up a brush. It's heavier now, like memory soaked into wood. Samuel, and you begin. The first figure is faceless. Yamakisa. But you know his shape, tall, lean, smile too perfect. You dip into a black so dark it eats the light. You name him Edward. The brush resists, then surrenders. He appears, then begins to crack. His eyes peel open from the canvas, confused, trapped. The second figure, crooked posture, powder-scented gloves, polite betrayal. You name her Marple. You dip into gray, not silver, graveyard gray. She appears beside Edward. Only now, she's not knitting. She's holding a scalpel. The third figure has no form, only hands, dozens of them, holding pens, brushes, carving tools. The archivist, the one behind the wall, the one who painted you. You name it silence, and when the color touches canvas, you hear a shriek. Not from the gallery, from inside your chest. The canvas pulses. You feel your ribs ache, your fingers blister, your veins throb like wire. They're inside you, Vera says, always have been. And in, you grip the red pencil and sign a name, not yours, theirs, all of them. The frame splits, the gallery trembles, and one by one, the other paintings begin to peel. The harbor, the bakery, the vicarage, each one curling in on itself like burned paper, ash falling like snow. The painting of you resigned cracks down the middle, and from behind the rupture, you see something bright. Your original sketch, unmarked, untouched, unclaimed. Vera reaches for it. It's still yours. You pull it free. The gallery howls. The light flickers. You tear it from the wall. You run. And this time, no one follows. Outside, the village is gone, replaced by open land and sky and nothingness. The buildings collapsed inward, as though ashamed to have ever existed. You and Vera walk for hours or days. Time has no grip now. When you reach the sea, she stops. I never made it this far. You hand her the red pencil. Finish it. She smiles for the first time and sketches a boat. Simple, crude, enough. You both climb in, push off, and for the first time, the tide doesn't pull you back. As the shoreline fades behind you, you look down at your sketch pad, still blank, but now it waits on your terms. No shadows, no screams, only the faint scent of salt and paper and freedom.